Welcome to 11 Recaps. If you enjoy this summary, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. It really helps me keep bringing you engaging content. Ready for your support? Awesome, thank you. Let's dive in. The narrative commences with two indigenous brothers loading a nuclear device onto their sailboat, situated 15 miles from the Queen's Gate. While the younger sibling exhibits fear and anxiety, the elder reassures him of their familial obligations and the necessity of completing their mission. As the American Air Force attempts to apprehend them, the younger brother activates the bomb beneath the sailboat. The scene then transitions to the suburbs of Los Angeles, where Evie and her children are engaged in a typical day at home. Meanwhile, her husband, Malcolm, is at work, experiencing the tremors and booming sounds of the unfolding chaos. A blackout envelopes the city, leaving Evie and her children bewildered. In a frantic call, Malcolm instructs her to seek refuge at her sister's homestead. Before the communication is severed, he warns Evie against inhaling the now toxic air. She quickly wraps her children in blankets and heads to the car, only to realize they have forgotten their pet dog. Covering her mouth, she rushes back to retrieve it. As they attempt to flee, they become ensnared in traffic, with everyone trying to escape the turmoil. The scene shifts to the homestead, located far from the urban chaos, where Jenna Ross and her daughter, Claire, appear to be living without a care. The narrator describes their well-stocked cellars and sturdy shelter. Claire is seen playfully trying on her mother's old dress. Evie, in a state of panic, calls Jenna, but due to weak cellular signals, Jenna struggles to grasp the situation in Los Angeles. Nevertheless, she deduces that Evie and her family are en route and promptly prepares a guest bedroom for their arrival. Ian watches the news on television and learns about the nuclear attack on Los Angeles, which has not yet been officially confirmed by the authorities. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, a soldier named Jeff joins his family for breakfast. His youngest son prepares runny eggs, while the older sibling maintains a strained relationship with him. Tara, Jeff's wife, takes all three children to school when Jeff becomes aware of the bomb threat. Unable to reach her by phone, he pursues her in his car, during which he contacts a friend to invite him to the Ross residence, as he requires security personnel for his property. He eventually finds Tara and the children, bringing them back home to gather his equipment and arsenal. On their way, they stop at a grocery store for Tara to pick up supplies. Jeff observes the chaos as people fight over groceries, and the power suddenly goes out in the store. One of Jeff's team members nearly resorts to violence against a man who struck a woman over tissue paper, but Jeff intervenes to prevent such actions in a public setting. Tara soon returns, and they depart with Jeff's team following in two military vehicles. Tara reaches out to her contacts in Los Angeles, who speculate that the Russians have launched an attack, citing a cyber assault, power outages, and unusual stock market fluctuations. Upon arriving at the homestead, Ian and his family greet them warmly. Jenna expresses concern over her inability to reach Evie, prompting Tara to assist her in establishing communication via a satellite phone. Meanwhile, Ian commends Jeff's team and instructs his assistant, Christian, to provide Jeff and his men with a comprehensive tour of the property. As Tara demonstrates the satellite phone to Jenna, her son, Abe, encounters Claire Ross in the garden and strikes up a conversation. Ian leads the soldiers to a higher vantage point to establish perimeter posts. Meanwhile, Evie continues to face challenges on the road. She stops at a gas station to refuel, only to find the location overrun with individuals fighting for access to fuel. Initially, she experiences panic. However, she quickly manages to transfer her children to another vehicle that has sufficient fuel and sets off. Abe joins Claire in the gardens, expressing his frustrations about his father's unreasonable behavior regarding the circumstances. But Claire helps him understand the gravity of the situation. That night, Jeff stays informed about the deteriorating American economy through the radio news. Another character, Rick, is introduced as he shares a meal with his family at their dinner table. The power outage has also disrupted their water supply. When his daughter expresses the need to relieve herself, he takes her to the bushes. While there, he overhears his neighbors being robbed of their food, accompanied by the sound of gunfire. Realizing that his home may be the next target, Rick decides to evacuate his family and head to Ross Homestead. On his journey, he encounters some associates but chooses not to engage and continues driving. The following morning, a crowd gathers outside the homestead, pleading for shelter, but Christian and the soldiers are only allowing those approved by Ian to enter. An enforcement officer named Blake discovers Ian in his cellar and begins to inspect his firearms. He insists on seeing the necessary permits for the weapons and the residents present, as having more than 30 individuals on his property requires authorization. During their dispute, Jeff overhears and cautions Ian not to underestimate him, warning that he will return with a SWAT team after witnessing the stark contrast between their comfort and the plight of those suffering from food shortages. The next evening, Jeff and his group notice that the barn behind the homestead is ablaze. They take this development seriously and urge Ian to recruit additional men, as the enemy has already begun signaling their intentions. They recognize that they will not withstand an attack for long, especially in comparison to Blake's SWAT team. The following day, Ian and his troops engage in simulation drills within the forest, while Jenna, accompanied by Tara and Claire, delivers provisions to those stationed behind the gates. Close to the gates, Jeff informs Ian about the intruders on his hills, but Ian dismisses the concern, believing they are merely hunters. Rick, who has been camping outside the gates for several days, spots Ian and pleads for entry. Ian expresses his regrets, but ultimately denies Rick access, citing that he only permits entry to those who have assisted in the construction of his homestead. As Jenna and the girls distribute food, they are confronted by an increasingly aggressive crowd attempting to seize their supplies. Jeff and the other men quickly pull them back inside for safety. During this chaos, Tara argues with Jeff, while Abe requests that Jeff assign him to guard duty. Although Tara opposes this decision, Jeff consents, recognizing the urgent need for additional personnel. He assures Abe that he will be stationed at the rear of the homestead, the least active area. Meanwhile, Jenna confronts Ian about the distribution of food to the campers outside, but he remains preoccupied with assessing the longevity of their supplies. The following morning, Tara expresses her frustration over their youngest child's reluctance to address them as mom and dad. Jeff reminds her that they adopted the child from a particularly challenging foster care situation, which may explain the delay in her adjustment. Tara is also displeased with Abe's early morning shift and insists on taking his place. Meanwhile, Abe and the soldier assigned to him notice two hunters aiming their rifles in their direction. They attempt to alert the hunters using a megaphone, but it fails due to a depleted battery. Abe reaches out to Jeff via communication devices to keep him informed of the developing situation. Jeff instructs Abe to fire a warning shot into the air to deter the hunters, but when this proves ineffective, he orders Abe to take aim at the intruders. The sound of a gunshot reverberates through the area, prompting immediate concern among the group. Abe takes the life of one hunter while allowing the other to escape. They transport the injured hunter to their infirmary, where he speaks of his wife before succumbing to his injuries. Abe, overwhelmed with guilt, cries out and admits his actions. The nurse, Elena, reacts with anger, accusing the boys of murder. In an attempt to resolve the situation, Ian proposes the establishment of new rules, but Jeff refuses to accept his authority. As Abe sinks into despair, Ian becomes increasingly frustrated upon discovering a hole in one of his wheat containers, indicating theft. Meanwhile, as the soldiers gather in the woods, Jeff begins to question their methods, feeling they are acting superior to others. His friend defends their approach, citing their training and armament. Determined to create a structured chain of command, Jeff resolves to implement a proper organizational framework for the homestead. Ian later assesses their supplies and realizes they will deplete their vegetables and wheat by summer. Jenna proposes utilizing their garden for cultivation, but Ian points out that it is not the appropriate season for planting. Moreover, with the impending cold weather, they face dire consequences if the nation does not recover from the radiation soon. In the garden, Tara and Jeff attempt to console Abe, who is consumed by guilt over the hunter's death. His younger brother overhears the conversation and begins to view Abe as a villain, but Tara intervenes, offering a different perspective and comforting the child. Jenna also confronts Ian, expressing her feelings of alienation in her own home and her distress over Jeff's group shooting hunters while safeguarding their resources. Ian pleads with her to remain resilient for the sake of their children. Outside, Evie finally makes her entrance. The gates swing wide for her arrival, while Rick and the fellow campers gaze on with bitterness. As darkness falls, Abe turns to Claire for solace. She not only affirms his feelings, but also leads him to their greenhouse haven to shift his focus. Together, they sow seeds, nurturing Abe's mental recovery. Expressing gratitude, he departs. Meanwhile, Jeff catches a radio broadcast detailing interstate military conflicts. Alongside Tara, he aids Abe's healing, though Abe remains bedridden, reluctant to rise. Jenna showcases her wheat grinding technique to Ian, suggesting their bread surplus could sustain both their group and the homeless beyond their walls. Ian rejects the idea and forbids Claire from visiting Abe. Stepping outside, he savors berries plucked from his garden. He observes Malcolm arrive at last, embracing his children and facing Evie's ire for his prolonged absence and silence. Jenna warmly receives Malcolm, guiding him through the grounds. With Ian's reluctant approval, she erects tents for the homeless in the open air. As Ian and Jeff learn from a newcomer that FEMA is restoring power with diesel generators and distributing free food. Heading their way next, Jenna relishes sharing meals with the outsiders that day. Ian probes Malcolm about his whereabouts, stirring tension. In private, Evie confides to Ian that Malcolm is unmedicated, urging restraint. Soon, Blake storms in with his SWAT team, claiming the homestead and ordering Ian to vacate. A dispute erupts, igniting a firefight among the SWAT soldiers. Ian takes a bullet in the chaos and is rushed to the infirmary for treatment. He pulls through but slips into a coma. Jenna flings open the doors to the homeless and kneels in prayer by Ian's bedside. She assumes leadership of the homestead, cultivating crops with the community's help. Their fresh, inventive ideas yield off-season fruits and vegetables. Through toil and contribution, Abe mends his wounds and finds genuine joy. After a month, Ian awakens. Jenna attributes their survival to divine favor, earned by aiding the destitute. Here, the story concludes. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping recaps.